Hey everyone, welcome to Budgetless Brews. I got Timmy out of the budget brews and said, screw your budget, we're going over. And just because of that, Timmy said, screw your Zer list, here's my TNT CST list. But
like
it's a
Zer,
Shimmer
but
list.
better.
Always getting on me. Always getting on me. Play TNT.
Always-
I don't want to play TNT. Play TNT. Like a damn dad.
I know I'm worse.
All right. Yeah. Welcome to a new series. We're just going to be going over some spicy decks. Doesn't necessarily have to be a tier 1 deck, but aiming to have a competitive deck that does some pretty unique things. Because of those unique things, the strategy is powerful enough from other shells that we're gonna maybe throw.
What about our other
guest
guest here?
Oh, yeah. Mikeyjh joining us. Mikeyjh, where are you from?
I'm one of the main mods over from the Founder server. I'm also really active over on the Evo Discords, been making a bunch of different Thrasios Akiri, Thrasios Brew shells, and I'm also one of the main Anala builders these days.
He's a dirty Anala player.
Yeah, I can't count much, Timmy. You know this. I'm not good at math. I only can count to 4.
Is it?
Well, I can only count to 11 if I take my shoes off.
Yeah, exactly. See, I can't count that high. That's why I don't play Godo. So Anala's where I live.
Anala was one of those decks where I felt like I was doing the arithmetic functions. I can't remember what the hell it's called. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. That deck just has so many. Do A plus B, then C, then D.
It's only like 26 steps, I also played Gitrog, so I guess that's where I get it from. There's something wrong with me.
Oh,
he
there's
divides by 0. He divides by 0. That's the math that's going on there.
Yeah, I always found the lines with Anala to be like, I know them technically, but to execute them under pressure is not necessarily my forte.
And here I am, probably a resident Storm player sitting there, having to find lines to win after you have 30 cards in hand. Well, let's see. All right, you guys are going to go do whatever you want. I'm going to sit here for 10 minutes and ponder over my hand. I got to figure out a way to win.
Which is kind of the inspiration for this deck.
Yeah.
Would you like me to go into the inspiration behind it?
Yeah, Timmy, why don't you take it away?
All right. So, I like TNT a lot. I used to play a lot of Thrasios Tymna back in the Paradox Engine days, where you would actually manually storm off a lot with Top, Sensei's Divining Top. And when Top got banned, pretty much, not all, but a lot of the builds and a lot of the players shifted to Hulk packages.
You mean when Paradox got banned?
Yeah,
Top is still legal.
Yeah, when P-Engine got banned, a lot of players shifted over to Hulk strategies, and I was still kind of a holdover. But with the prevalence of Turbo Nas being such a kind of a strong dominant strategy in the meta right now, and after watching Richie dunk on me a few games with Zer, I kind of had an idea of what could we do with a Shimmer style shell if we were to add green to it. And green gives you some nice options that you don't have access to in Esper. You get a couple of 1 CMC mana accelerants in the form of birds, Deathrite Shaman, Noble Hierarch, Elves of Deep Shadow, stuff like that. You get a couple more tutors. You get Neoform is a big one. You also gain access to some other types of accelerant in the form of Culling Ritual, which is really good at, not only does it just clear the board, but it will help power out your Nauses. It's not as efficient as Dockside, but it can be as equally explosive. You still retain access to Ad Nauseam, Consult, and then, so you have that whole Esper Storm line that Zer kind of relies on. But then you also can use the shimmer mirror itself, and you still have a pretty reliable way to get your hands on necropotence, which is one of the biggest strengths of Xur in and of itself, is the fact that its commander can just tutor necro repeatedly. But being in green, you also get Carpet of Flowers, you get Sylvan Library, so again, you get a couple of more nice cards to kind of help round it out. And then lastly, you gain Crop Rotation, which will help you tutor up at instant speed, which I'll get to in a minute. A couple of lands down further. You also get Veil of Summer, which is kind of a almost a second copy of Silence, effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, that Crop Rotation will allow you to get Emergent Zone. So now you effectively have 2 copies of Emergent Zone, thus doubling your redundancy for it, as well as having your Shimmer lines as well. With the Shimmer lines, we are adding in Shallow Grave to help with the ability to be able to reanimate the Oracle or the Lab Man after it gets pitched to Necro or to like a Windfall or something.
And then we go over the top and we cast once you get to the end step, Necro triggers on your discard or in your cleanup phase. And the neat thing is with the Necro triggers on the stack, you can Shallow Grave your Thassa's Oracle or your Lab Man, and then you can go over and you can cast Consultation, and you can do it just off of something like Dark Ritual and hold a bunch of counter magic. So you've got that package going, and there's like some sweet things going on in this deck, and there's some other things where I'm like curious how they're going to play out. But Mikey, do you have any thoughts so far? Because you were the one, from what sounds like with Tim, you were really interested in this deck. So what thoughts did you have, and what drew you to this type of strategy?
What I really liked about it is that at its core, it's more or less CST, which is just one of the better control shells right now. So I really like that it has the ability to play like a really nice mid-rangey game. You can lean on Thrasios and Tymno just to draw a bunch of cards. And then additionally, once Necropotence is just such an efficient payoff because it's only 3 black to cast it. So you can do that early off a Dark Rit, or if you just have a lot of advantage, you can just drop the card Necro for 20 or 30, and then you're off to the races. So I really like the idea that it can really play that mid-range game really well, but it also can really quickly switch and just drop like a bunch of different combo pieces. So I think this is a really interesting spot in the meta right now. And it actually kind of takes a little bit, it's very similar to this one deck I've been working on that I call Thrasios Fastios, which is Thrasios Vial Smasher. So I sit at a table and everyone's like, oh, he's playing 4 CR. And I'm just kind of laughing to myself. I'm like, no, this is a Turbo Nas list. And then I'm Nasing turn 2. So I like that this list can kind of throw people off because they're going to see Thrasios Tymna and be like, oh, it's probably CST. Maybe they're doing a Hulk package. But then you're able to just pivot to a strategy that people aren't really expecting these days.
Yeah,
for sure. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that was kind of one of the things was that, like, while it's not going to be the fastest Turbo Nas list at the table, it can threaten pretty like effectively and pretty reliably early turns, because you do have a lot of the redundant fast mana that the Grixis decks have. Sans, obviously Dockside, but with Shimmer Mirror, you have the ability to start flashing in your rocks very quickly as well, which can kind of help give you an additional edge.
Yeah, and I'm from the Xur school, right? And I'm looking at this from a Xur player. And the things that I just want to point out that are super appealing that I wish I had access to. The first thing was Elvish Spirit Guide. I would love to have access to that.
Yeah.
The Spirit Guides are so busted. Like, if you can get into those Jund colors with Adnaz or with Necro, it's just it's incredible because that free mana really helps. When you Necro so much, one of your choke points is your mana.
Right. And
getting access to free mana helps. Also access to the certain colored of mana that you want. Some other options I'm just like, I love in this deck. I like the accelerants. I think they're great. Being able to go, I think turn 1 birds, Deathrite, or Noble. I always love starting with those. Even Elves of Deep Shadow can set up for like a nice turn 2 Necro.
Yeah, it's not the worst.
No, it's not. And the 1 life doesn't matter. Like, you're still going to draw 20 or 30 cards off that Necro. And the nice thing is, a lot of your deck also doesn't just fold once you're screwed with Necro, because you've got draw engines. Like, you've got legit better commanders in your command zone than Zur, and it's not even close.
Yeah.
Something else I like about this list too that I think gives it a reason to play it over, say, like Tymna Kraum, is Culling Ritual is just an amazing card right now. Like, at its worst, you wipe the board and then you cast a Thrasios and get like 6 activations out of it, and that's at its worst, and that's still not a bad place to be.
No. Yeah, it's a good
Culling Ritual might be the most from like Modern Horizons 2 and all that stuff that came out, Strixhaven and the stuff that came out in quarter 2. I think that Culling Ritual is the most busted card I've seen, like, in multiplayer, and that's like saying a lot considering what came out in Modern Horizons. This card just, every time I've cast it.
Yeah. And to be honest, that's kind of what drew me to this deck to begin with, was the fact that not only can I leverage Shimmer pretty effectively, but that you can also crop rotation into the E zone to like pop off at people's at instant speed. Like, it's not the main line, but it's a very viable line that will probably, like, I've seen a lot of like evolutions lists kind of do a similar thing. Well, they'll crop rotation into E zone and then do their thing over the top of everybody. You know,
Corvold does that too. Corvold has that explosiveness. Yeah. And that's just raw power. And something to really note out there, if you guys are wondering, well, why is it so important to go off at instant speed? If you weren't around in the Flash Hulk meta, you don't know what the power of Flash is. It wasn't the allure of a turn 2 win. It was the allure of, okay, I'm going to wait for everyone to, for a lack of a better term, just, blow their load, counter everything, interactions gone, and then I'm going to win over the top.
Yep.
I'm literally going to threaten to the win. And that's like super powerful. And at the same time, when you have Necropotence and you're drawing like 30 cards, if you have a couple of free counters or a couple of free pitch counters and cheap counters, like, you can stop a lot of what's going on and you can still win through effects like silence. It's just, and it's absolutely nuts. So that's where like some of that flexibility comes into play. So that's like some really nice core synergy that you got going on there. I love your Ranger Captain of Eos. I'm super jealous.
I like that.
I think this card is amazing. What are some things maybe that you aren't sure of in this deck, Timmy, that you're...
So some of the stuff that I'm kind of, to be honest, like, I'm iffy about, given the tendency to want to lean into the instant speed lines, is actually the sorcery speed wheels. I'm so originally when I built the list, it was I omitted these in favor of a couple of the instant speed creature cast spells from Zur, but it was like highly recommended by like multiple people I'd just been shown the list to. And again, this list is really just at the like concept phase, so there's probably a couple of slots that are a little soft. To be honest, I've been playing mostly in the MCL, so I haven't had a ton of reps in with this list at all. It's more of a brew at this point. I just want to make sure that is explicitly stated. And so those are probably the two like spots where I'm kind of, maybe this Elves of the Deep Shadow, maybe like, I definitely wouldn't go deeper on dorks than Elves of the Deep Shadow at this point. And even that one, I'm still kind of like, I basically chose it over 2 mana rocks, essentially. just given the availability of what type of mana accelerants I have access to. One of the downsides of this deck is that it does not run red, so therefore you do not have Dockside. You also lose out on a couple of other, you lose out on Rite of Flame, and there's a couple other like red rituals that are pretty efficient that you don't have access to. Not that they always get played. You also lose out access to at least one additional wheel and breach as well. But again, the idea was that while those decks are more explosive, we're more resilient, and we are teched in such a way that we can reliably kind of go over the top like the old Flashlock decks did. So in your guys' observations, what are potentially some of the weaknesses you see as an observer of this style of list?
So, Mikey, do you want to start off? Since it sounds like you've played some CST and you think CST is really good. It's one of the things I picked up that you thought CST was a really good control deck right now. So, how does this list compare to some other CST lists where you can see a weakness out of, or or something along those lines? Is there anything that just kind of sticks out to you?
Yeah, so one thing I think might be the one weakness for this deck is just the overall speed of it. Just right now, obviously this is meta dependent, but right now just decks are just so lightning fast. People are really able to consistently get turn 2, turn 3 win. I definitely see this deck falling a little bit more on like the turn 4-ish range.
3, 4.
So that's something that I think could be a weakness. And then obviously we're using Shimmer Lines. Artifact hate is extremely strong against this. I don't see too much artifact hate these days because everyone else is on the same train of I want to go fast.
Yep.
But it's definitely something if someone's playing like say Nagila, where you can run Stony Silence and Collector Roof in those lists or some evolution variants, you definitely can get just completely shut out if someone drops like an early piece of artifact hate.
Right. Well, and then that's when you pivot to the backup, either like Turbo Nas plan, or you pivot to like just pure consult. At that point. That's also why I'm like tech heavy with free interaction as much as I can.
And one of the nice advantages is Thassa's Oracle and Demonic Consultation / Tainted Pact are super easy to get off Necro. And that's a pretty big, and you've got a lot of rituals too. Like you don't need your artifacts to really work or produce a ton of work, and you can easily play around a lot of things. So I like that.
And I have Calling Ritual as an out to most of the Stony Silence effects. They're all 2 CMC and less, so that is a thing as well. So okay, I guess the next point, and I think the original ideal for this style of brew, of this video, was actually to maybe discuss some brew options as to what maybe you guys thought might be some cards to put in those other slots. So what I have here is a list of cards that I removed from previous versions of the list, mostly being CST and Shimmerzer. So what do you guys have thought-wise?
I have a couple of things that I want to start with. And there's some cards I'm not a big fan of, and I know that this is going to be a little bit more controversial to say, but I don't really like Sylvan Library in this deck. I
agree. I'm very soft on Sylvan Library these days. I don't like that it doesn't give you advantage right away. And if you get this out like turn 1 or this is your turn 2 play, I find that people are like, cool, they tapped out, and then they just drop like a Nas or something, and I'm just sitting there waiting to get to my draw step.
I can agree. I am. I'm not going to put up a fight on that one. That's one of kind of the ones I was on the fence with anyway.
I think Sylvan Library is, it's really weird. I was curious how you guys felt about Rhystic Study. I've actually heard a lot of people start saying, man, Rhystic Study is just not as good. It's like, it feels super bad to tap out into Rhystic because you tapped out, you basically have some free interaction. 2 other people are trying to go, zoom as fast as possible. And it kind of seems like a recurring thing. I think Rhystic's amazing still, but I was curious what you guys thought.
I think Rhystic is still too good to not play, but I've definitely been in several games where I dropped a turn 1 Rhystic and that wasn't enough to stop turbo players, because
The
if
onslaught.
if the Nas, yeah, because if the Nas resolves, I might draw some cards off them, but they're gonna find an answer to Ristic, and I'm just waiting. So I think the card's too good not to run, but there are definitely games I've lost because I've tapped out turn 1 to cast a Ristic Study in several of my decks.
I definitely think the fact that, like, so unlike with Sylvan Library where you actually have to wait till your next turn, and then you're essentially getting 2 cards at the expense of like 3-ish off of your Nas, is kind of like why I was okay, like why I would definitely not disagree with the exclusion of Sylvan Library. Whereas one, this is pretty easy to get down pretty quickly, just being 1 blue pip and then 2 colorless, like almost like in these style of decks, one colored pip and 2 colorless is almost as easy as 1 colored pip and 1 colorless most of the time.
Let me ask you something. This is where it kind of comes down, because I don't think it's a matter of casting it. Would you keep a hand that had Dork, 2 lands, Ristic Study, no interaction? Like, your interaction could be Abrupt Decay, maybe you have like a Ritual, and maybe a Tutor.
I mean, I probably wouldn't keep a hand like that with Fish either, to be honest. If it
if I was on the play and there was Fish, I would keep that. But with Ristic Study turn 2, I would probably ship that back and see what I can get. Because if you're like also light on interaction, then I just don't want a chance that I'll draw into it with Ristic.
Yeah.
So I'm not
slower deck.
Yeah, and I'm not saying Ristic Study is bad, by the way. Like, I fully advocate Ristic Study is really powerful, but like, it's almost to me where it's reached that. Is this something I want to cut? Because, I mean, I've cut Ristic from decks that were just trying to go fast because turn 2 Ristic wasn't where I wanted to be.
Right.
Turn 1 Fish I'm fine with because I'm getting cards, or people aren't tapping out and advancing their board, and that just gives me more time. But like turn 1 Ristic was pretty much it where I wanted to be on some of my turbo decks. So I mean, like, it's slowly in that 99th, 100th card, and I think that just kind of speaks volumes to where we're at in the meta. But I'd probably still play it.
I was gonna say I'd be hesitant to cut it, especially since not only are we packing Force of Negation, Force of Will, Pact of Negation, Fierce Guardianship, Mental Misstep, and then a bunch of 1 CMC interaction. It at the worst is a 1 mana tax on everything.
Yeah, I definitely think the card's too good not to run, but it is something that I don't always prioritize early if I'm in a really fast pod, because people can just go off through it. I've gone off through it several times, and people are like, why are you feeding the Ristic? And I'm like, they tapped out, and I need to just not hit one of their 3 free pieces of interaction, and I'm only casting 3 more cards to win. I think I'm fine.
Especially in Sans Red, too, because we're down an additional piece in the form of not having SWAT. So,
we also don't have Dockside too, so it's not like we can also just go Dockside into Ristic and keep mana open. And I've seen some people do that recently. But I wanted to point this out because I do think that, like, in brewing, this does come up. Like, just because a card is really, really powerful doesn't necessarily mean that it has a home in your deck. It might seem a little bit worse when you play, and that's okay to cut. And that's part of exploration. So I like the rest of the enchantments. Like, this is a Necro deck. We're not touching Necro, clearly.
Yeah, we're definitely not. And I think Fish and Carpet are very relevant. Like, Ristic Study, I would say, would probably fall in that, like, if you are playing the list and you find that it's really underperforming, you might want to consider cutting it. But I can't really think of a card that I would want to play over it for what it does.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. We're in your artifacts now, and I think that these are pretty interesting. So here's my conundrum with Zur. I really hate signets.
Same. I hate them so much.
And I have to play them because my life total's very relevant, and you can't always rely on talismans, especially if you find yourself going down to 2 or 1.
Right.
So signets to me are like, oh, they feel bad, but
So the logic behind running the signets was that this deck is very much it's very deep into the blue black. So I wanted to have as many reasonably efficient versions that make blue black. So I was hesitant to go with an additional talisman because it didn't, like, if there were 2 talismans that made blue black or another 2-drop artifact that made blue black, I would be playing it. But since not, and a lot of these decks have, especially from my experience in the past. Now, granted, having Thrasios on the command zone kind of helps even this out. But a lot of times these decks actually get tons of colorless mana, but then get choked on colored mana. So having a signet or 2 can help filter it into colored mana.
Oh, for sure. Like, there's upside to those. But man, I hate playing them. Like, in 2-mana rocks, oh, they're the bane of my existence.
I also just couldn't think of a better rock to put in that slot, honestly.
I mean, I think you're like at that tipping point where you can even consider cutting it. Because the nice thing is you're green. Like, you have good 1-mana. Go ahead.
I mean, I've got all the good 1-mana dorks in. I'm hesitant to cut it to drop below because one of my artifacts is top. One of them is Jeweled Lotus. So that kind of starts softening up my metalcraft requirements.
Your Mox Opals, you don't need, like, Mox Opal's great after you storm off, but I always consider Mox Opal one of those cards where I have a critical mass of cards in my hand. This is like a Lotus Petal to me. And I think that, I would probably replace one of these at least. Wouldn't it be just a hesitation for me to replace one of these? But what I'd replace it with, I'm not really sure. Like, another ritual is okay. Maybe a dork. I know.
Well, so, that's the thing is, like, so I've got all of the good rituals right now. Like, all of the good black rituals. I've got arguably the best 4 dorks in our colors. There isn't really, like, because all the dorks after this either make white or green.
Arbor Elf is the only other one that I can think of, and that's really dependent on your mana in play.
Yeah, it only triggers on forests, and this deck's gonna I was kind of. Plus, the other thing is you want to keep your artifact count high enough so that way you can lean into Zur or into Shimmer Mirror as well. That's the other consideration to think about.
Do you have any thoughts, Mikey, on maybe a good replacement for some of these rocks? Because I mean, there's a lot of 2-drops.
Even for maybe a replacement for the Elves of the Deep Shadow, even I would consider going up. Personally,
yeah. Unfortunately, I feel like you have all the rocks that I think you could run. One thing, I don't mind like some of the 2-mana rocks as much that you can use right away, but Dimir's Signet is something that sticks out to me really hard. I just hate having to play a rock and then have to use other resources to use it. Yeah. I kind of like adding the green black talisman. I forgot the exact name of it.
It's Talisman of... Oh boy, I'll know it if I see it. Oh, I spelled that wrong. Haha. I think it is...
You gotta check what that is. I never...
yeah, I can never keep this all straight.
I think it's Resilience.
It is Talisman of Resilience, correct?
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind cutting Dimir's Signet for that, because while the deck is mostly blue-black, I see that it's still 20% green. Yeah. So I think that'll be fine. I don't think that'll really hurt your mana much, and I like being able to just use that right away, especially with Shimmer lines. Because you can, if you have like Grim Monolith or something, you can tap that, get this, and then get black, and black is how most of our win cons work.
Yep. All right. That's. I was gonna say and I would that, and that was like that. I mean, and Dimir's Signet was like the last one I put in there. I'm just hesitant to drop below. Honestly, I would actually like to cut one of those dorks for another rock, to be honest.
I like those dorks too much, especially with what you have going on in the deck. Like,
yeah.
I think
you need them.
Yeah.
Especially
Now,
because you have Neoform too, so you can like Neoform a Dork into Oracle, which obviously isn't like the first line you would do, but I think just having some 1-drops that make that available is pretty good.
Yeah. I more have Neoform in there, so I can Neoform Thrasios into Shimmer Mirror or Hull Breacher or Lab Maniac.
so
Yeah, that makes sense.
what if I told you I was actually thinking about cutting Dimir Signet for a creature, but it wasn't a mana creature? And it helped keep sure. I was thinking about cutting it for a Hope of Girapur, of all things. Hope is just super, super good.
Yeah, I kind of like that, especially with Ranger Captain, because you can Ranger Captain search for Hope, and then that way, next combat, you can lock down potentially 2 players from casting spells.
What about in place of that Sylvan Library?
Well, we're going to cut Sylvan Library regardless.
I already cut it. It's already cut. We're at 99 cards.
Okay, so we're going to put Hope of Girapur in, but I do think Hope of Girapur is a necessity. And the other thing I like about Hope is it's such a good early drop. The thing about Hope is once you start attacking with it, you make it so one player just cannot win until they remove Hope.
It's also a Timna Donger, which helps us get cut off.
Yeah. You know, and
all right. So
what do you think of? Oh, sorry.
No, go on. What do I think?
What do you think of Jeweled Lotus in this list?
Turn 1 Timna's really, really good still, I think. Like, that's pretty much it. That's what I think of Jeweled Lotus.
That was kind of the main plan with it. And then also just to have Metalcraft. If there was another rock worth slotting in, I would be okay with it. But kind of again, like our first iteration was the bicker about Dimir Signet, which was kind of my like least wanted rock anyway. Do you have a suggestion for Jeweled Lotus, or do you have a thought on it?
I don't really have a suggestion. I was just more curious, like if we think that it's worth it. I don't know. Like our commanders are just very cheap as it is. I know getting out Timna early is good, but I'm just not sure if that's a slot that we necessarily.
Yeah, I also really don't have like other than maybe adding the blue-green talisman in that slot, I don't really have much other consideration. We can table it for now and maybe get back to it after we've kind of gone over a few more things.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. All right. So let me look at the mana base real quick while we're changing stuff around.
I think that's the last thing I want to tackle because we're going to be maybe changing some cards. But I agree that that's
our mana production is actually it's a Tim Handy mana base. That's all I can say. It'll cast spells on time. That's the one thing I'm good at.
Fair
enough. All right, so some other considerations. So I think the instant speed, I think the interaction suite, I think is pretty good. I don't really see any clearing slots. Maybe Spell Pierce. Maybe.
I have some thoughts on the interaction, but one other artifact that do want to bring up.
Okay.
I don't know how relevant it's going to be in this type of deck, but I still think it's worth consideration. So when you Necro, you might not find the pieces that you need. If you're going to go for this Necro line, like you really have to have consistency. And one of the really powerful artifacts that I liked, that I think is just, it's a staple, is the 2 Scroll Rack. It's really needed with Shimmer. Like I think it's one of the things where it feels kind of bad, but I think it's a little bit. Here's the other thing. I don't think it's necessarily at its worst in a deck that can also play Timna to fill its hand up and fetch away things. Like, I don't think it's an embarrassing card to play. Maybe not the best, but I do think that like it deserves some consideration.
I'm not 100% opposed to it. Let me remove this while I'm thinking about
Like that's what I might remove one of those mana rocks for. I know you're not into removing those mana rocks, but I mean,
I'm definitely not into removing. Like the only one that at this point I would think of is maybe Jeweled Lotus for Scroll Rack. Maybe.
I kind of like that swap.
You do? All right. I'm overruled, boys.
I think you could do that. I don't hate it. I don't love it. I'm kind of impartial to it. I'm more in love with removing that talisman, the resilience talisman. But I will happily say maybe Jeweled Lotus needs to go.
I definitely would be hesitant to cut any more rocks because we need to be able to reliably cast our spells when we do stuff. Like
we do. No, I agree with you. We do. One of the nice things, though, is that we're in green-black, and all of our instant speed spells, beside a couple of counters, what we want to do are basically green and black. Like, it's really... You're not going to cast Thassa's Oracle off of the blue mana in the Shimmer lines. You're not going to do that. Yeah.
Right. True.
And that's, like, where you want something like an Entomb and... a couple of other of those effects, and we'll get there. We'll talk about that, but
okay,
that that's kind of why like it's really important to have access to. Well, I fizzled, but I've got this piece that still lets me get there, so I'm going to use this piece and try to get there. Because I mean, when you necro, you get to see 30, or you get to see maybe like 25 additional cards off of Scroll Rack.
So I personally would be fine with cutting Spell Pierce for Entomb.
I think we could do better.
Really?
So I do. I think that. Well, let's go over the interaction first, right? Like, so one of the things I think we all universally agreed upon was this deck. It's slower than the Turbo Nos decks,
right?
Which means you have to have a lot of cheap interaction.
Yep.
The nice thing is I have to play Misdirection to keep my Zur alive. You don't have to play Misdirection in this deck because you don't care about keeping, Thrasios or Tymna alive.
Not most of the time.
Yeah, and it's just a bad, it's a really bad counterspell. But that being said, like there's some cheaper interaction, like I want to go over like the 1-drops, like you have Miscast, you have Swan Song, Spell Pierce, which are all good.
Metal Mist, Flusterstorm, Chain of Vapor.
Yep. Those are all, solid. Was Dispel in there?
No, I cut Dispel for... I think I cut it for Spell Pierce, personally.
That's fair. I run both, but...
Yeah,
I also want to load up on cheap interaction to interact.
Well, I have Veil of Summer. You don't. I also have, which gives me like an extra. I kind of thought of the spell more as like trying to protect my win versus being a defensive spell versus offense. Like, I'm sorry, I thought of Dispel more of like protecting my combo versus stopping somebody else most of the time. So I slotted in Veil there. At least in my head, like in my assessment.
I think that's fine. Veil's solid. I like Dispel mostly because of what it was hitting. And I was going off at instant speed. Yeah. So, I mean, the only people that are going to interact with me were, instants. I didn't have to worry about anything else. Right. And it still hit ad nauseum and stuff like that. Yeah. The card that I'm actually looking at, we kind of have the shell for it. Like, we could probably get away with playing something like Counterbalance in this deck. And I think that, that card in general is really strong right now.
I've been blown out by it many a times.
In case you all don't know, Counterbalance is one of my favorite cards in all of existence.
I mean, I think you can put it in the shell somewhere. Look at that giant smile of it.
Did you see my little Timmy tail just wag?
Oh. Yeah, especially when you're on top, like that is just if you can assemble that block, which is not hard to assemble, like you just control the board.
and Thrasios. He just starts scrying away cards. Yeah, this doesn't deal with it. This one doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I could see cutting Force of Negation.
I would not cut Force Negation right now.
It doesn't help protect our Shimmer lines at all, is my thinking. And we have lots of other interaction to deal with people on their turn.
I agree and I disagree. Like, the format is so fast right now. Like, I think you just want that free. Like, that's one of the appeals of playing Angel's Grace right now, is how fast the format is.
I would
Angel's Grace.
So how about cutting Spell Pierce for counterbalance versus Force of Negation? So one of the logic behind that is that while it doesn't protect my combo, I anticipate, just from my experience with CSD, that I'm not going to be the first one trying to win most of the time.
I agree with that.
Having the free interaction on my opponent's turns to be able to untap and do my thing, I do envision a lot more. And having that extra piece of, especially with losing SWAT, I think it makes it even a little more relevant. I do realize that at its heart, this is deck's probably gonna mostly win at sorcery speed, but to be able to threaten and be teched, to be able to pile over the top.
Yeah, I definitely think it's between the two cards, and I don't think either one is right or wrong. So if you guys think that Spell Pierce is the weaker of the two, then I think that's completely reasonable.
Yeah, and it could be argued the other way, honestly.
Exactly. Like I don't think there's a correct decision here, so it's this kind of whatever
Personal.
you two think, or yeah, exactly. I don't think
The
there's a right or
majority
wrong.
rule, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think that you have to play something like that. You have to play like counterbalance, and you have to play like you don't have to play counterbalance. You definitely have to play Force of Negation. My worry is, like, if you're gonna tap out for a turn 1 dork, it lets you at least tap out and not feel terrible for a turn 1 dork, or tap out for turn 2 Timna. It lets you tap out, not feel terrible, and then start recouping card advantage immediately. And I think that, like, that matters. And when you start getting into some of those higher level tables, you can start making deals with, hey, I can stop this, but it's, we're going to slow the game down. I'm not going to go proom anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So what's next on the considerations?
So aside from that, I think that the nice thing with Shimmer and the nice thing with Storm in general, is, or well, not the nice, but like one of the major choke points, like I said, was your mana. And I really like some of the quote unquote free saga spells, the ones that let you untap lands. I don't know how good
Free saga spells.
The ones that snap.
Okay.
Urza
Saga.
Yeah, like
the
snap, frantic search, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think that Legacy, those ones. I have Frantic Search in my deck as a way where I can still keep a grip full of cards and discard my discard one of my 2 guys, my Oracle or my Lab Man.
Right. So one of my hesitation with playing things like Snap, Frantic Search, those 2 in particular, is 1, we're not on Dockside. 2, we're not on High Tide. 3, most of our mana production is in the form of non-land permanents. Thus, it might be relatively difficult to reliably get those off, like to get full value from it. I'm not saying I'm opposed to it. It's not generally a way that I lean when I play these types of decks.
I like those cards more in 3-color decks. I feel like here slots are just a little too tight. Like, I don't see anything I would want to cut for either of those 2 cards at the moment. There's other things I would want to add before. Before those.
I agree and I disagree, and here's what I'm going to say. A lot of times you're going to go Dark Ritual or Cabal Ritual, and with something like Snap or Frantic Search, you can turn that black mana into colored mana immediately.
Yeah.
And those are some common lines I get all the time with Zur, where I really need to turn, I really need double blue, but I also need that double black. I like those spells. I think crop rotation kind of offsets that a little bit, which is nice.
Yeah.
Especially with Elvish Spirit Guide. I almost wish that maybe we could look into something like that. We'll see. Like, we'll see if there's available slots. But I do think that that's kind of a priority for this, for this Necro plan that we're on.
So I'm going to be honest here, looking at this list, like kind of looking back over it, and I know this might be a little contrarian, but I think Abrupt Decay is essential because it essentially hits every single like heat piece that we care about for the most part. In fact, I can't really. There's very little that I can think of that it doesn't that I care about. But with that in mind,
I think Abrupt Decay is great. That's such a good green card. Like, that's one of the reasons why I like, playing green.
But with that in mind, Assassin's Trophy might be a little...
I like that Assassin's Trophy is very flexible. But I could see now that Culling Ritual is a thing, Assassin's Trophy is not as necessary because for the most part, Culling Ritual hits the things that are problematic for us other than Rule of Law effects. But there's only usually like maybe one of those out on the board. So I feel like Abrupt Decay and like Chain of Vapor as our bounce spell can kind of deal with that as well as all of our counter spells, obviously.
Right. Well, and my thought with and my logic behind that is that like we're not necessarily like we're not really on like twister loops per se, so we're not just gonna blow up like it is a good piece of removal and is a premium piece of removal. But with the addition of the Culling Ritual, like you mentioned, and the fact that like we're really only trying to get like one thing off the board so we can just go, that maybe it might not be necessary. I don't know. It's just a thought. We can table it for now.
Disagree. I think that one of the cards I really want to add in here is an Entomb. Like, that's a high priority card to me.
That's what I was thinking. That's maybe
I agree.
Slot.
I want some, and for those of you that don't understand why Entomb's really important, it's a third Thassa's Oracle or Labman. It really acts like that because you Entomb, Thassa's Oracle or Labman. You go to your cleanup, let's just say, or you shallow grave it. And I really like if we get another shallow grave effects. That's why I'm running Necromancy. The nice thing is you also don't have to run Necromancy. You can run the instant speed one that it costs 3 with buyback. I mean, you could play that if you wanted.
For 5. Yeah, Corpse Dance.
Yeah, for Corpse Dance if you wanted to play that. I just play Necromancy because I can. Necromancy is also not terrible because you can steal things, but
yeah, I don't think that makes the cut, but I do really like Entomb.
Yeah. I slotted Entomb in where Assassin's Trophy was, and that could be wrong. Like you might find yourself in a meta where some of these like little counter spells like Miscast, Swan Song just quite aren't cutting it, and you might want more like board interaction versus stack interaction, and that's where you would want to kind of whittle these out a little bit. Personally, a lot of the idea from this deck, besides coming from Zur, came from a build that Dave from the subreddit, he's one of the moderators there, is called Aggro CST. Him and I think he plays from Fire Riff initially came up with the concept, and that was kind of what gave me like I was looking at it and I liked it, but I'm like, this just like it needs a little tweak to it, and that's kind of I guess you could kind of say this is like almost like my version of it or my thought on it. So, all right. I didn't mean to derail everything.
You're all good, boss.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to bring up.
Yeah.
All right. I don't like when people see a list and like, this is how I need to play it. Like, you're going to need to tweak, I think, a couple things here and there, like just depending on your meta. Some people play more mid-rangey stacksy metas. Other people are, all gas, no brakes. So certain cards are better in one and not in the other.
Yeah. I mean, I know people that play in just like a 3 frog meta. I'm like,
that sounds awful.
So I think we're good, like as far as looking over instance. There's some other instance I'd like to add that I think have higher priority too. Like I really think Quicken's really good, but that's we're playing we're kind of playing a Quicken in the form of crop rotation. It just sucks if we actually draw our
Emergent.
emergent zone. Yeah.
Yeah, I've tried Quicken in a few lists, and half the time, or not even half the time, like 90% of the time, it just served as a cantrip.
Yeah.
So funny you say that. What does Labman need?
A cantrip.
Exactly. That's why I don't hate Quicken. I used to hate it, and then I'm like, oh.
Well, Yeah. All right. So what else you guys think might be on the chopping block? I'm pretty happy with it as it stands. I mean, I personally can't think of anything else in the non-lands that I want to cut or swap around, but what about you guys?
There are two cards I was really looking at. One of them I'm not as hard on. The other one I think should definitely be in here. So, well, with the one that I'm not as hard on because I want to hear your guys' thoughts. I think Transmute Artifact might not be a terrible add because that can help you find your Shimmer. And it also can, now that we're on Counterbalance, it can help you find top early, which is really good to help establish a lock.
My thoughts on Transmute Artifact are the following. You can't cast it instant speed off Shimmer or off of it's not an instant, it's a sorcery. So finding your Shimmer doesn't really help in the sense that you want to cast your Shimmer after you've drawn a bunch of cards in your hand with Necro. So like that's not where you really want to be. And that's also where Entomb can shine, by the way, is you can entomb your Shimmer and reanimate your Shimmer Mirror. You do have that option.
Oh yeah.
The reason why I really like something like Quicken in this deck, beside that, is after post Necro, sometimes you literally get silenced and you go into Quicken Will. Like that's a line you do. Because you put your Necro triggers on the stack, you Quicken Will, you start playing everything from your graveyard that you need to play. All your rituals and...
Yeah, I just kind of think that Quicken gets replaced by crop rotation by giving us access to E-Zone.
I think both are really good. Like I'm pretty hard on the Quicken train with Necro. But I think you can play some games and see where you're at. Maybe Quicken's like
Quicken is down in the considering, I believe. Did I not? Yes. So it's in the conversation. I just personally was like, meh. Kind of the same thing with like Scouts Warning. Like I kind of look at Scouts Warning as a holdover from playing Esper, and we have access to like better things with the green, personally, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. One other thing I think Transmute Artifact has going for it though is it also helps get Scepter, because that is another line that we're on, which I kind of like.
So I'm really torn on this because you sack an artifact to get Scepter. So it kind of makes Scepter a little worse.
Yeah, but you only need 3 mana to go infinite with Scepter, and that's pretty easy. Like if you have 2 rocks and a dork, that do it in itself.
My only rebuttal, besides that it finds Scepter, is that Esper doesn't have Neoform to find Shimmer Mirror. We do. And we have a commander, so we always have access to a 2-drop.
That's where I like Quicken.
I don't know if that sways that conversation at all.
You're making my case for Quicken. I love this.
No, I'm not. I think Quicken's a dead card. I used to always play it in. I used to always play it in Shimmer Mirror, and like back when we were just trying to win with Labman, and even then I didn't like Quicken.
I think Quicken is one of I think Quicken in general is a pretty I'd probably put it a 3 out of 10 Magic card. Like it's not a very good cantrip, but it does something unique.
I think it's a 2 out of 10 in these lists.
I think in Zert's it's a staple at this point. I have nothing but good Quickens. Okay,
I mean,
that's all I'm gonna
that's fine.
say.
And, I mean, arguably, I have seen you dunk on me enough with Zer that, like, you know, it is a valid point. I just at this point would be hesitant. Like, I don't want to cut any card for Quicken, like, at all.
I'd cut Time Twister for Quicken. I know it's bad. It's controversial.
I would
to
cut,
me.
I would cut Windfall before I cut Twist. Actually, no, I would not cut Windfall before Twister. I would cut Twister for Transmute.
I'm imagining a whole Breacher line right now. God. You know what? I really do think that if you could find room for Quicken in this deck, and Timmy's not into it, and I get that, but I think if you could find room for Quicken in this deck to give it a shot, see where it is. Like, at the very worst, if it cantrips, that sucks. But like, that's its floor. I think its ceiling is enabling some really busted things off of Necro.
I can't co-sign that.
That's super fair. Or
I'm not on the Quicken train either.
All right. And what about Transmute?
I've never been a fan of Transmute and CST. I know some people are big advocates for it, but
like,
I hate
doing
sacking.
If I was doing like Kinnan lines, I might be a little more on board. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, if you had like Kinnan or you also were playing Citadel, I can see it being better.
Yeah.
Like I said, that was the card I'm a little bit softer on.
Yeah,
but I thought it was worth talking about.
Yeah. All right, what's the one you got the hard on for?
Mnemonic Betrayal. That card's too good. It's a 1-card win.
Oh, Meme Betrayal? I love Meme Betrayal.
Yeah, that card I think goes in every blue blacklist. I have never been disappointed when I cast it. It'll always get good value. It can win the game 99% of the time because everyone's playing this way.
You don't play against Sean and Scott. That card's always a doo-doo for me. But what about, all right, so then where would we want to cut for that, though, is the problem?
I could see like Twister or Windfall.
I would I'd cut Yawgmoth's Will at this point. Like, so this is the other thing. Like, what are you doing with Yawgmoth's Will in this deck? You're maybe trying to get an ad nauseum, and then you have to Y Will.
Yeah, go back off again if that gets stopped.
I like Yogg's Will a lot. Like, I play Yogg's Will, Breach, and Mnemonic Betrayal on my Anala deck. And like all three of them just are like 1-card wins later in the game. Like if we have Rituals in the yard, like if we have like Odd Mana Oracle.
See, that's like a Nala though. Like you have your engine in your command zone already you're ready to go.
Like but we still have a lot of ways we can win with it. Like if our Scepter got countered earlier, or it got wheeled away from someone else casting a wheel, or we cast our own Windfall because we had Scepter and no dramatic reversal. I just think it's very versatile, and we have so many A+B combos in this deck that it's easy enough to assemble something.
I like Yogg's Will a lot, and I understand that without Quicken, you're not so hot on it. But again, we have crop rotation.
It's not just without Quicken. I'm just never a big fan of Yawgmoth's Will in a lot of these decks where I don't think like. After you cast an ad nause, I feel like in this deck, you're not going to fizzle. Like, I'm just looking at the CMC, it's low enough. I mean, and the amount of free rocks you have and stuff, you should be going super deep.
Really? Time Twister for Meme Betrayal? That makes me feel dirty.
Either that or Windfall, whichever. I also am someone who's very much on, like, I run 27, 28 lands in all my lists.
Yeah, I'm running 29.
29.
But
I think a land could be good.
You think so?
Yeah, you've got enough artifacts and you've got some 1-drops. I think you can easily cut a land and go down to 28 and be fine.
And when you look at the math, like the difference between 29 and 28 is like 0.02% chance less of making your land drops or something like that. I only
added the 29th land is because I counted this as I count that 29th slot as a spell with Emergent Zone.
Which two?
Waterlogged Grove or Nurturing Peatland.
Those are the two I was looking at as well.
Let me look at the spread. Well, so we're a little soft on our blue mana production currently, and we're a little over on our green. We're also a little under on our black.
Well, you can't. Like, Ancient Tomb, I think, is too powerful to cut. But I do think
we're not. It's just deciding what I think we keep the blue green versus the blue black because I could be wrong. I'm not on honestly. This is what I want to cut, but I don't want to cut it at all. I don't like cutting actual fetchable duels. Shocks I'm okay with, but not duels. And we're only running for duels, or for shocks, we're only running Watery Grave and Breeding Pool. And I'm hesitant to cut either one of those. So I'm gonna have to say, honestly, maybe we cut Exotic Orchard. It's the least it's the least reliable out of all of the rainbow lands we have. It doesn't produce mana if we go first.
I think I would prefer Waterlogged or Nurturing Peatland over a Rainbow Land, but I understand also drawing cards can be important on the lands because we're on Lab Man.
How do you guys feel about Forbidden Orchard randomly? I know it's a land.
I want to keep all the 5-color lands in that we can.
I've heard people say don't play Forbidden Orchard with Tymna. Like I've heard diehards say that.
Yeah, I think it can be a little bit awkward when you're on Tymna, and the other thing too is
we're not on a massive. Well, we're also not on a massive creature count that can really swing. Like we're not attacking with Elvish Spirit Guide. We're not attacking with Birds of Paradise.
Yeah,
we're not attacking with Noble Hierarch unless it's by itself.
The way I see it is that I'm usually giving those tokens to a deck that either already has a lot of creatures I'm not swinging into anyway. Like, for instance, if like there's an Evo player in the pod, I'm generally giving them the 1/1 because they don't have access to things like Calling the Weak. And while sure, it's like something that they can Eldritch Evolution into a dockside, they already have Thrasios and they're already playing Dorks and are playing so many other things. I don't think giving them the 1/1 really increases their chances of popping off with one of those evolution effects. So, granted, it's pod dependent, but I haven't never been in a pod where there's not one person I feel safe giving the 1/1 to.
I've even been in some of the pods I've been in where everyone's playing Culling Ritual, the red sack dude.
That's the other reason why I want to keep Forbidden Orchard in, is because we're on Calling Ritual. That's a free 2 mana.
Yeah, it is.
Yep.
We can
With that, I think we cut the Nurturing Peatland because I think we need the blue. Our blue's pretty low, and I'm just gonna plop it down there. All right, so now we got a slot. Now, what are we putting in that slot? What
Demonic Betrayal.
Meme Betrayal.
Man, I would cut Time Twister and play Meme Betrayal. Like, especially, I'm not a big fan of Twister in this deck. Maybe I'm just not seeing it. I get why people like wheels.
How do you spell mnemonic?
MN.
MNE.
MONIC.
Yeah.
And then Betrayal.
There it is. So Twister does a couple of things. One, it helps with Hull Breacher. 2, it helps refill our hands. And it can act as a way to help reset if we get stopped.
So I'm going to be honest. We have Tymna in our command zone. We have Thrasios in our command zone. If the game goes to the point where we need to fill our hands, we're in really good shape to fill our hands. I don't like giving other players cards. Now, if you are on like 3 of the, Opus Thief or something like that, that's way different. That's, the core of one of their strategies. But to me, like saying, Hull Breacher is really good with this, and I'm playing Hull Breacher already, so I'm gonna play this. I don't think, like, I've never been a big fan of Time Twister.
Well, that is honestly, I think it's gonna wind up getting cut for something else. I just don't know what that else is at this point.
Quicken.
Get out of here! Get out of here! Quit it!
Sorry, go ahead.
No, so what are some of the other things that you guys were kind of considering besides Quicken?
I like Grand Arbiter as an option in this deck too. You just like Grand Arbiter whenever I get to play.
You mean Grand Abolisher?
Grand Abolisher, yeah, not Grand Arbiter, excuse me. Grand Abolisher. I just like that card when I get to play these colors. I don't know why. Just
the double white's kind of hard, but it's a good card.
We're in Ranger, so
Yeah. No, I mean, you're true. So some of the options that aren't in there right now are Winds of Rebuke, the Scout's Warning, Angel's Grace, Spellseeker, Notion Thief, Op Agent.
Okay, so hear me out. I like Praetor's Grasp a lot. Like, I'm super into this card. I think it's really, 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 really good.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, I've been finding it to be kind of slow, unless I was going for the win, which is nice because it's like a redundant piece. But like, I really, really like playing Opposition Agent in these type of decks. Like, you can keep mana open for days because you're threatening so many different wins to win, or so many different ways to win at instant speed.
Yeah.
Where your Opposition Agent's kind of like, oops. Whoops. Just walked right into that, especially when people start catching on. I've always liked Opposition Agent. And I'm looking at Timna, like, do we want to increase like creature count so we can attack? Is that really relevant?
Yeah, I don't mind adding Op Agent or Grasp with since we're on Timna.
I'm gonna be quite frank. I'm actually not a huge fan. The only reason why Praetor's Grasp is in here is because like I really go to Praetor's Grasp, and I'm not as like on board with it as most folks, and I would probably rather have a Op Agent versus that, or even a Notion Thief.
I'm on Praetor's Grasp if I'm trying to turbo. I don't really like Praetor's Grasp in mid range as much. I just find that your mana development sometimes just doesn't get you there because you're not on all the fast mana in the world.
Well, and this deck isn't supposed to be the fastest. It's supposed to be the last deck to go off, not the first.
Although Praetor's Grasp for someone's what's it called, for someone's stock side is primo.
That's true. Yeah, I do like Op Agent here more than Praetor's Grasp, though. I agree with everything, because we're not trying to win turn 2. Like, if we get that hand, like, we'll jam Nas turn 2, but that's not the goal of the deck.
Yeah, that's not the main plan. The main plan is to try to let them fight it out, and then we're like, oopsie. You know.
Or crack Emergent Zone on the stack, and they're like,
haha, gotcha, bitch. You know. But this list is actually looking pretty.
Sorry,
no, I was just saying this list is looking pretty tight. Like, I am not really finding cards that I'm like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So anything else you guys are really kind of keen on trying to get jammed in here, or?
I don't know. I've always liked Bloom Tender in these decks too, but Bloom Tender is probably a little too much to ask.
I mean, I don't disagree with Bloom Tender being good. My only hesitation with Bloom Tender is that it's a 2-drop dork. So like, at least with the rocks, like, we pay the 2 and then they do something immediately. Bloom Tender does not. Even though Bloom Tender most of the time can be more mana down the road, I just don't think we're really gonna like see that payoff all the time.
Yeah, I don't like Bloom Tender because it's like, that assumes pretty much. So you had like turn 1, like, to get like good value out of it, it's like turn 1 Thrasios, then turn 2 you did a Bloom Tender. And like, that doesn't really set us up that much turn 3. It's like Bloom Tender taps for 2, and then we have a Thrasios out. I don't know. It's just a little too slow. I don't like the value that it gives.
I agree. It's really slow. Like, that's where I'm like, eh. And I totally am on board. But I think that's like something you can consider.
Yeah.
There's some other cards from the news or from Modern Horizons 2 that we haven't really discussed. I don't know how you guys feel. Yeah, I don't know how you guys feel about Suspend. I like the card a lot.
I do too. I mean, if we were cutting Assassin's Trophy, I'm not sure we necessarily want to add in like a thing that only kills creatures.
That's
personally.
super fair.
But yeah, I will definitely.
It's a little too linear.
Yeah, I will definitely put it. I will add it in just to drop it into the considering, so that way it doesn't get lost in the shuffle. And you know what I mean?
How about Dothy Voidwalker? Do you guys know what that one is?
Yes, the rest in peace on a stick that also lets you steal a card.
It's a rest in peace for your opponent, so it doesn't screw with your graveyard, I think, which is a big deal.
Yeah, and then you can like counter their Nas and then steal their Nas, which is nice.
Yeah. And it's also a 3/2 shadow creature. It pairs super well with Timna.
I think the card's nuts, personally. I love it.
I think it's really, really good. I just don't know if this is its home.
Is there a creature you think you'd play over it? Like, I think
I would play every creature in this deck currently over it.
I like the card. I'm really big on it.
I think it's really good. I'm not discounting that at all. Am I spelling Dathi wrong? Dathi?
I think it's UI.
Dauthi. I like the fact it also has shadow. Like that's
Yeah, it's unblockable essentially.
yeah, it's like riding the Delu horse for me.
I mean, do we want to play that over Twister?
I like the card a lot. I think it's
Yeah, I think it's a very relevant hate piece with every red deck on Breach, and it also has the chance of getting you value because if they don't like, it's either they have to deal with it and then try to go off, or they go off with it out, and then if their payoff gets countered, that's now our payoff.
Well, and also they can't brain freeze into it either. Like
Exactly.
that's another thing.
I think it's just such a good hate piece right now because everyone's playing with their graveyard.
I mean, I would be willing to cut Twister for it, but then at that point, I would probably run out of slots that I would be like anything beyond that. I would be would have to be really, really, really strong to warrant slotting out at this point. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I think the card is one of the better cards that you can play.
All right, so I cut Twister for the Voidwalker. So, I mean, I personally at this point, beyond actually like testing it, think the list is pretty good like it is. I mean, is there some other stuff you guys are trying to at least put under consideration for down the road? Anything like that? So
we're 4-color mana base, and this is something I wanted to bring up. We're running Ancient Tomb, and I think that's really important. Urza's Saga, to me, just seems like a super easy include for a CST deck. Maybe I'm missing something, but
we don't really want to sack. Like, all right, so it comes down turn 1. It taps for a colorless. Turn 2, it makes a dude. And then turn 3, it tutors for a 1-drop.
It doesn't ever have to make a dude. Like, that's the thing.
Does it still tap for mana on the
Yes.
second sock? Okay.
It does. It's still colorless.
Like, I'd almost rather run...
I'm not a big fan of it in this list, personally.
Yeah. I mean, because, like, what's it getting for us? It's getting top. It's getting...
Top mana crypt, mana vaults, Lotus Petal, get one of our Moxes.
To do it.
Yeah, like, the thing is, it's earliest turn 3, and then it sacks itself, so we're going down a colorless to go up 1 if we get mana crypt, which I just don't think is a great rate.
So...
Especially on turn 3.
I agree, but like we're also playing CST. So like that's, you know, I don't know. One of the things I ran into with CST was it also grabs Hope of Ghirapur. That was the other thing.
Okay, yeah.
Like I think it's all right. I definitely think the card is good, and I think it's worth playing in certain lists. I don't think we want to add another colorless land here, especially when we're on Emergent Zone already.
Yeah.
I just think that'll kind of skew our colors a bit, and I just think it's a little too slow for what it does.
That's super fair. I think the card's personally busted, but
I can add it to the maybe board for later.
Yeah, it might be one of those cards that's just too good to not play. Once you start playing with it, you're just like, oh, this just fills the curve where like this feels really good where it shouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely be like, hard pass on that, but I will let you live the dream, Richie.
Sometimes just getting 4 mana on turn 3 is pretty nuts.
You know, I would think in like that type of iteration, we would be not on this plan. I think we would be more on like a Seedborn Muse, like counterbalance plan versus like a, you know what I mean? Like,
and I wanted to throw it out there. Like, I'm not saying it's right or anything. You know.
Yeah. Any,
Yeah, 2 things I would add to considering. I definitely don't think that this list wants them right now, but I would put Transmute Artifact and Bolsa Citadel. I'm definitely going to be proxying up this list this week now that we've tweaked it a little bit. And those are 2 cards that I'm going to want to test at some point after I get some reps in on this version.
YOLO's Citadel.
I would I would also consider adding an Esper Sentinel.
Oh yeah, that's another Modern Horizons 2 card I was thinking about, especially because we're on Ranger Captain. I think that's something I would test instead of Stairs Ascendant, but like I said, I want to get some reps in on the deck and see how things feel, and then I'll go from there.
You know about the house, my lord and savior, Father Belt. I love Colossus Citadel. Have you played any CDH no ban?
Yes.
Tinker
Citadel.
Yes.
Oh, so good.
Fun fact, I don't want to take this too far away while Timmy searches. Built a vintage, or played in the Moto Vintage Cube, and had Tinker into Citadel and won with Oracle by using Brain Freeze.
Beautiful.
All right, I'm going to switch it over to... All right, so here's what we're looking at. We're looking at 14 creatures, Birds of Paradise, Dathi Voidwalker, Deathrite Shaman, Elves of Deep Shadow, ESG, Hope, Hull Breacher, Labman. We got Noble Hierarch, Op Agent, Ranger, Sierra Senate, Shimmer Mirror, Thassa's Oracle. Seems good. Sorcery, we got Calling Ritual, I think is bonkers. Detutor, Imp Seal. We have Mnemonic Betrayal, Windfall, Neoform, Yog's Will. So we up the creature count. We could potentially go with adding, as a thought, we could potentially add Diabolic Intent. We have the creature count for it now, but we would have to cut a card.
I don't really like cutting. So I love Diabolic Intent. I don't like the fact that it's a sorcery, and I think honestly, like if I was going to cut Diabolic Intent, I would just cut or if I was going to play Diabolic Intent, I'd cut Neoform for it. And at that point, you know, what do you value?
I'd probably just cut Windfall.
Here's the thing I like about Windfall a lot.
And discards.
It's not only that, you can feed fishes and Windfall and go off. It's not hard to do that. Like I've done that a couple of times.
Yeah, it's a good line. All right. I mean, overall, I really like where the list is at. I don't think are there any other cards you think we should drop into the considering currently?
So my strong considering, like, I don't care if I sound like a dead horse. Strong considering, you know, Quicken, yeah. But I'm playing Quicken. That's from the Zur perspective. Like I'm willing to admit could be totally wrong. It's either one of those cards I'm super wrong with and you don't need it, or it's like, holy shit, like it just fixes lines this deck has problems with. And that's like you have to play the deck, right?
Yep. Sean's gonna make fun of me for having counterbalance in here. He calls it my Jitte.
Oh man, well Sean Marley can make fun of us. We're building his Reanimator deck next. That's the next project we get, Timmy.
Oh,
pretty excited. Pretty happy about that. I think you've made some really clean cuts and you've kind of kept the theme, and you know, I think some of the key points that we can honestly take away is really important to say. We're not the fastest deck. Nope. We're not Turbo Naz.
Nope.
Are we explosive? Sure. Like we can have explosive starts, but we're not Turbo Nazing. We're being a little bit slower. Because of that, we can leverage some really powerful effects. Like we can play Dathi Voidwalker. We get Timna with just works really well. Yep. Hope of Girapur is a great card. You know, some of these creatures that some of the turbo decks miss out on. I mean, some of them play Hope, but I don't know how prevalent Dathi is with turbo right now. Do you have any experience with that, Mikey? That you want to throw in
with it? And you're Mikeyjh72.
Mikeyjh72.
Yeah.
I haven't played it in a deck, but I've played against it, and it is just so annoying, especially when you're in turbo pods, because everyone's kind of sitting there with like this. Like, I have Adnaz. I don't want the risk of getting countered because then the Dathi player just steals it from me. It makes people play really conservative, and I just think Grave Hate is so relevant right now as someone who plays decks where Grave Hate stops all of them. I just think the card's extremely powerful, and every time I see it in the game, it's a priority to remove.
And the one thing that's kind of sneaky, by the way, with this Calling Ritual, we are kind of playing like some effects that's more or less slow the game down.
Yes.
And you can Calling Ritual to get massive value into like a Mnemonic Betrayal. And I've done that. It's insane. But you know, I think we're a slower deck. We are playing ad naus. One of the biggest strengths of this deck, I think, is we can go off at instant speed with ad nauseum and feel good about ourselves. We can end of turn, we can go over the top, play ad nauseum. We've got lines.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
We got lots of lines.
And we're CST. We've got a lot of really cool, powerful things. Counterbalance. I think that this card's criminally underplayed, and
I mean, I chucked it in there a second. You mentioned it. The only reason I wasn't in there is because I thought I'd get shunned.
No, that card's so good right now.
Yeah. Well, and furthermore, like especially in our list, like if you sort this list by CMC, by mana value, I guess is what the kids are calling it now. Like, we're essentially locking out all of the 0, 1, and 2 drops. Over 35% of our deck is 0 drops because we have 28. Yeah, so we have 35% of our deck is 0. Almost 30% of our deck is 1. And then about 20% of our deck is 2. And we even have like almost a 15% chance of naturally hitting a 3 drop. So we'll have a pretty good chance to brick like if we get counterbalance in play, we have a really good chance of just blanking like one out of every three spells that people play.
The cards that like I think are a little dead but are combo dependent, we're pretty low on those. Ones like Dramatic Reversal, I really see this is where when we have Dramatic Reversal, I do wish we had something like a Noxious Revival. So if we ever do have to use it, we can, recast it, put it on top of our deck. And that way we're not just completely shut off the CST line.
Yeah. I haven't been liking Noxious very much lately, especially with all the Breach players around.
I don't disagree with you. I think that Noxious Revival, I think Noxious is okay. You don't like it against Breach?
No, because oftentimes I've just been finding that like they're just brain freezing the piece that I'm either trying to Noxious or they're brain freezing the thing that I Noxious. It could be play patterns more so than actual like things. I've just been seeing between that and Winds of Rebuke that Noxious is a lot less useful than it once was.
So I think Dramatic Reversal and Scepter are pretty dead in the deck without without there being the combo. Dramatic Reversal not as dead. Dramatic Reversal is an insane ritual, but
it's just a ritual.
Scepter's pretty terrible. And when I look at that, Scepter, Entomb, Dramatic Reversal, I don't really see any other cards where I'm just like, man, this is terrible. I mean, you can say like, I think
you have to make some concessions just to have that like, I mean, obviously in a pure card quality standpoint, you're looking at things like Shallow Grave and Entomb are pretty much only for certain lines, but you have to have a certain density of those to be able to actually execute the game plan that we're trying to do, which is potentially have an instant speed CST list.
So my also thought on Shallow Grave is I could very easily see a Ranger dying, an Opposition Agent dying, a Hull Breacher dying, and just being able to reanimate that at instant speed and be like, nah, bro, I still get these. Sorry, you get fucked. That's on you, boss.
And then
I love Shallow Grave. It's such a fun card.
Yeah, it's so good. And it only triggers at end step, right? Oh, there are 2 things we do need to go over real quick. One is Shallow Grave exiles at end step, correct?
Remove from the creature at the end of turn.
Yep.
Yeah.
So at the end step. The other thing is with Necro. When you discard with Necro, you discard 1 card at a time, correct?
You do, but you don't discard 1 card at a time. You don't go like, okay. So you discard 1 card at a time, but you have to discard down to 7, if that makes sense.
So you discard all your cards from 7, or every card above 7 at the same time.
Yes.
Okay.
So you don't get to discard 1, trigger Necro. It's you discard down to 7 because, and this is the rule, essentially your cleanup checks for your hand size. It then resolves your hand size, and then Necro triggers and starts a new cleanup phase. Really important to note, during that new cleanup phase, all silence effects end.
Right.
There are certain cards that will still work in your favor. Stuff like the white dude. What's his face? The
Grand Abolisher.
Grand Abolisher still works in your favor, but
If it's
everything
returned.
else, yes. So there are cards that still work like that, but all opponent silence effects end. So
Okay.
it's really
So-
important to note as a way that you can still win through silence.
So that's one of the things to remember is that when you necro for 30, you are immediately discarding to 7, and then those exile triggers go on the stack, and then you respond to those with the 7 cards in your hand.
Correct.
And what you're trying to do is you're trying to play. So essentially, you're just trying to draw 30 cards, pick the best 7, and then use those 7 cards in response to the exile triggers to win.
Or you can just also have the mana to cast Entomb and then reanimate your reanimate effect, and that's where like your Shallow Grave effect.
Right.
And
But there's
when
no opportunity from the time that the cards go into your hand with Necro to cast spells before you discard. Correct.
you do it at end of turn. You can still cast it at end of turn.
Well, when do you get the cards in your hand?
At the beginning of your end step, you put the cards into your hand.
So you can cast anything at instant speed before you discard after you get them in your hand with Necro.
Correct. And then
That's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure that we had it recorded that is how it worked, because the initial idea for the deck was draw 30 cards. Ooh, they're in my hand. Do Shimmer Mirror stuff. If, or run out those instant speed lines in your end step. Then discard down to 7. You get a new end step. If you need to lets things end.
And for those of you who are wondering how you're going to win with Shimmer Mirror, by the way, and I think it's really important. So the old win was you would play Aether Flux Reservoir, and that card is absolutely terrible. It's a 4-mana spell. It wins the game, but it really has no other purpose beside winning the game. It's just 4-mana bad artifact.
Right.
Sensei's Divining Top with your Isochron Scepter loops.
Yeah, that draws the rest
Tap,
of the deck.
top, hold priority, activate Scepter.
Yep.
Untap, top priority. You'll eventually draw everything in your deck besides your Sensei's Divining Top. If you loop it right, I think you can still draw your top.
Yeah.
It's like you have to go +1 to draw your top, whatever. You've drawn your entire deck. At that point, you can go to discard and discard your Thassa's Oracle. You can do a couple of other things. You can also discard your Lab Man, and then you can reanimate it with your your Shallow Grave. And that's a way that you're winning, and that's the reason why Sensei's Divining Top is really good in this deck. Normally, I'm not the biggest fan of top. I think it's pretty okay in this deck, and it has some merit. It works with Timna. It works,
That's and counterbalance. So I just wanted to make sure we got that cleared up before we ended the video, got out of here, and then we're like, oh, you know what I mean?
And so, I will say one of the last things I do want to say is you don't want to go fully with top. What you want to do is you want to go as far as you can still brainstorm, because you're going to want to brainstorm back your emergent zone so you can crack crop rotation to go grab your emergent zone, and at that point you can then cast your Thassa's Oracle and win the game.
Right.
So there's just some things you do want to consider.
Right.
And I think that's kind of super next level. We need to figure out a way to win the game that's not just relying on, hey, you guys can interact with me now because my silence effect wore off.
Yep, exactly. And that was kind of what drew me to this idea first, was this very much reminds me of an instant speed version of PST, which is a deck I love and have pretty handedly been kind of sad that I don't get to play something like that, and the current iteration of Thrasios Timna mid-range just isn't scratching that itch.
Well, Tim, we brewed your deck. It's unbudgeted. It comes in at a whopping total of
$7,000.
It's not bad. That's still within budget of CDH. I've seen $20,000.
I own every card of this list, so I mean, I can. If I didn't have two MLC decks built, I could put this together tonight.
You own that Doffy Voidwalker, Tim.
Oh, I mean, I don't own that yet, but I mean, I will.
Wow.
On Friday. I will on Friday.
Lying to our audience.
Yeah. Okay. I forgot we added new stuff that I can't buy yet. But all right. So I think we should wrap this up.
Yeah.
Anything anybody wants to plug? Mikey, where can people play with you if they would like to play with you? Since you sound smart on here.
So I'm pretty active on the Founders Discord. I'm also I play on Nexus every now and then. I'm trying to get more games in on there. And yeah, in general, I'm just always on Discord. I can give Timmy my Discord user. He can throw it in the description. If you have any questions about the deck or evolution or Anala, feel free to hit me up.
Okay. All right. Richie, what about you?
I'm working on this project, the Budgetless project. Maybe we'll do a budget brew of this once Tim gets some reps under his belt with this. You never know.
Yeah.
Tim's like, oh baby, how much is Counterbalance, Tim?
$16. It's
$16.
It's not the counterbalance that's the problem. It's the scroll rack in the top.
Yeah, top's like $70 or $80 right now.
Yeah. So, I got this all screwed up, but Sensei's top is 66 and scroll rack is where is it?
The Crown Scepter's $10.
It's 17.
Geez.
Yeah, probably the biggest thing that's going to hurt this deck is Shallow Grave, honestly. At like $50.
We have a replacement for Shallow Grave, don't you worry.
All right.
It's not very good, but it's a replacement.
Hey, you know what? Sometimes you got to make concessions.
Sometimes you got to play Quicken.
Yeah. Get out of here!
Animate, Unearth, they all get turned on.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining me. And have a good night.
See you guys.
Bye.
Peace out.